Chiamo. Give me a couple of seconds. Okay, Michamo.
Whoa. Dude, this is awesome.
Okay, we're just trying to get some things together over here.
Lefty loosey, righty tighty. Lefty loosey, righty tighty. Lefty loosey, righty tighty.
Alright, can everybody hear me? Alright, somebody can send me a message in the chat so we can see. Everybody can hear me clearly. Alright, let me know if the sound is good for y'all. Okay, cool. Alright. Bichiamo, Medinde, Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akan. Akwamumai, Amarukai, Tifi, Mu, Odwirafo. That means my name is Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akan. I'm the Odwirafo of Akwamumai, Amarukai, Tifi, Mu, which is the Akwamu nation in North America. This is AKANFO NANASOM, ancient authentic Akan ancestral religion. So we are on part 3 of the Akradinbosom series. So we're going through all of the Abosom of the Akan 7-day week. There are 11 Akradinbosom. Today we're going to be dealing with Abenaa. So before we get started with that, were there any other questions from that anybody had before we get started with Abenaa? Okay. Okay, so we're gonna move on. So we started with Awusi, which is our Sar. We started with Awusi in the first week. Then we went on to Ajua, who was all set last week. And this week we're going to start off with the female Abosom of the Ochin Unsoroma, or the planet Abenaa, or Benaa, which is called Mars in English. So, but first, before we get into specifics on Abenaa, because we're dealing with her first, and there are 2 Abosom that govern this particular planet, Benaa. There's Abenaa, which is the female, and then there's Benaa, which is the male. Abenaa is Sekhmet in ancient Kemet, and Benaa is Heru Bedet, or Heru Behudet in ancient Kemet. He's Ogun and Ogu in Yoruba and Bodun, and Iyaami Abeni is Abenaa in the Yoruba tradition. So, because we're dealing with these 2, the male and female Abosom of Abenaada, or Abenaada, we'll deal with Abenaa today, and we'll deal with Benaa next week. But because we're dealing with these 2, and it's very important, I put on the notifications going out to check out Maranechi, Divine Law and Divine Hate, parts 1 through 5, because that's critical to understanding who Abenaa is, and of course who Benaa is as well. So we're going to deal with, we're going to start dealing with the Maranechi first, and then we'll go into details about Abenaa. Now, divine order is, in our Akan culture, Inyamewa, Inyame, Nsheshe. Inyame is the supreme being, masculine, the great God, called Amen in ancient Kemet. Inyame in Akan. And then we have Nyamewa, who's the great mother, the great goddess, the great divine mother, and she is called Amenet in ancient Kemet. So you have Amen and Amenet in ancient Kemet, who's the great mother and father supreme being. And in Akan you have Nyame and Nyamewa. Now Nyamewa, Nyame, Nsheshe means the great goddesses and the great gods, the supreme beings, Nsheshe, which means divine order. She means to fix or to arrange in the Twi language. She means to fix, or intense fixation or coordination, arrangement. Nsheshe is the noun. So Nsheshe means basically an arrangement, an order. Nyamewa Nyame Nsheshe means Nyamewa Nyame Nsheshe, or order. So that means the divine order. So when we say Nyamewa Nyame Nsheshe, we're just talking about divine order. Nsheshe, to arrange or to fix or to plan, the divine plan. In ancient Kemet, the term for plan is Seshe, which means plan or arrangement. So Seshe in Kemet, Sheshe in Akan means the same thing. So Nyamewa Nyame Nsheshe can also mean, in ancient Kemet, could be the Seshe of Amenet and Amen, divine order. Now divine order is composed of two complementary poles, the expansive pole and the contractive pole. Just like you inhale and you exhale. Expansive and contraction. Expansion and contraction, that's the pulsation of life. Nyamewa, Nyame, and Sheshe, divine order, is composed of an expansive and contractive pole. The expansive pole of Nyamewa, Nyame, and Sheshe, or divine order, is divine law. And the contractive pole of divine order is divine hate. And we're dealing with law and hate, and we're going to focus on divine hate today because Abenaa and Benaa, Sekhmet and Herubehudet are the male and female, or female and male Abosom, or divinities, Ntoru, deities of divine hate. Now we've been conditioned to believe by our enemies, by the whites and their offspring, that hate is evil, hate is lower vibration, it creates a low vibration, it's a manifestation of immaturity, it's a manifestation of ignorance. Hate takes you out of your true divine focus. All of that is foolishness that comes directly from white people, from spirits of disorder who have no connection with any Abosom, any Orisha, any Ntoru, or Neteru, any Vodou. They're not connected to any of that. That's a propaganda campaign utilized by them to get us to get away from divine hate, which is the contractive pole of divine order. One half of divine order is divine hate. They don't want us to embrace our natural hatred for disorder, because then we would embrace our natural hatred for them, and then we would act on that, and we would exterminate them, remove them from rulership and cultural domination over our communities, and they're only here to consume and destroy. So they had to come up with a propaganda campaign to make us believe that hate is foolish, hate is destructive, hate is just inferior and self-destructive, and we shouldn't have any parts of it. So we're going to go into detail to talk about hate, and so we can understand that it's not only a function, they're divinities of hate, and that's who Herubehudet and Sekhmet are. So first we'll talk a little bit about law. Now the term law in ancient Kemet is typically written Ma'a in the masculine and Ma'at in the feminine. So everybody knows about, or has heard about, typically when they've learned something about ancient Kemet, you've learned about Ma'at, learned about the laws of Ma'at, or sometimes they would talk about the 42 declarations of innocence, or of Ma'at, or the 42 laws of Ma'at, things like that. They're really not necessarily 42 laws of Ma'at. There are 42 assessors of Ma'at, 42 divinities that we go before as we're making our transition to be accepted into the ancestral realm, to live in harmony with the honorable ancestresses and ancestors, and we have to invoke 42 divinities, and we communicate with them, just like we pull libation and communicate and give offerings to the divinities that govern our Akra and our family Abosom and so forth. When we're making the transition via death from this realm to the ancestral realm, in order to make that smooth transition, we harmonize ourselves by invoking these 42 Abosom, and the different declarations of innocence are an outgrowth of that communication we have with divinities. So it's not just like the Ten Commandments. Yes, they got the fake Ten Commandments from that particular text, but it's not just 42 laws and we memorize 42 laws and that's how we get in harmony with order. We are invoking deities, male and female Abosom, communicating with them, and there are 42. So people have heard about the laws of Ma'ah, the laws of Ma'at. There is a male Abosom, a force in nature, called Ma'ah. And there's a female Abosom, a force in nature, called Ma'at. These are divinities. These are divinities that we can communicate with, that we can pour libation to, that come to us through ritual possession and various other means. These are divinities. So Ma'ah and Ma'at, in general, the generic definition is law, but also balance. Now, in the Coptic dialect of ancient Kemet, you have a different pronunciation. Just like in Akan culture, for example, in the Akan language, the tree language, the term for female is Obra, and it's a tonal language, so different tones give different meanings, yield different meanings. So Obra in the Asante Chui or Asante Akan dialect means woman, female. Oba means child. Berima means male, but Oba means female. Oba means to open. So depending on the tone, if it's a high tone and then a low tone, Oba, that means female. Oba means to open. But in the Akwamu Chui and also the Ekwiapem Chui dialect, instead of saying Oba for female, we say Obea. So Oba in Asante, Obea in Akwamu. There's a similar occurrence in the language of ancient Kemet. The term Ma'ah, meaning law, and Ma'at, meaning law and balance, the generic definition for that. In the Coptic dialect, which is the late dialect of Kemet that came into use about 2,000 years ago, instead of saying Ma'ah, they say Ma'ah or Ma, they say Meh. So the term Meh means law. Just like Oba in Akan means woman, female, and in the Akwamu dialect is Obea, the A became an E. In ancient Kemet, the ancient dialect, we say Ma, Ma'ah, or Ma'ah means law, but then in the Coptic dialect, Ma becomes Meh, and it means law. It's also interesting that the term Meh in Coptic also means love, meaning love, desire, and so forth. So Meh means law, and Meh means love. In the English language, if we look at the alphabet, the whites and their offspring did not create the alphabet. The alphabet that we use today is taken directly from the scripts from ancient Kemet. We had different scripts in ancient Kemet. We had the hieroglyphic script, the pictorial script, but we also had the hieratic script, which is a cursive form, a short cursive form of the Medutu, of the pictorial script. And then we had demotic, which is a even more condensed and business-friendly type form of the language, of the script. The characters that became the alphabet for English, Greek, Roman, Arabic, even Sanskrit, these characters come directly from ancient Kemet. So the whites and their offspring did not create an alphabet. They're using the exact same characters, the phonetic symbols that we use in our phonetic script. They use the exact same symbols, A through Z, and they call it the English alphabet, but that's a misnomer. And the same, just as a sidebar, is true for the numerical script. There's no such thing. The numbers from 0, 1 through 9, those can be found in ancient Kemet, and we have some documentation on that. Inside one of the pyramids, you will see all of those 10 numerals. So when we understand that, then we understand that the letters that we use, just like in the Medutu and the hieroglyphic pictorial script, they still have a function, they have a form, and they have a meaning. By the time it gets to English and they're corrupted a little bit and reused, the sacred functions and meanings and forms are not fully there, and the whites and their offspring, of course, don't understand these functions, but they still repeat the terms, they repeat the sounds, and some of the information is there, but most of it is not. So just like we said in Coptic, Ma'a became Meh in Coptic, La, and Ma'a, love, becomes Meh in Coptic. That's just the dialectical variation of the pronunciation. In the English language, with regard to the term law, the consonantal structure is LW. Now, if you go back about 1,500 years, the letter V, and remember all of the phonetic figures come directly from ancient Kemet. The letter V evolved into the letter U about 1,500 years ago as the whites and their offspring were corrupting our language. And then about 500 years after that, the letter U evolved into a new letter called W, double U, which means two U's side by side. But often it's written as two V's side by side, and the W is actually two V's. So this is why in European languages you have the V and the W, they interchange, and the way they're pronounced is they're interchanged in different dialects. So for example, the term Sweden is also pronounced Sweden by some Odwirafo, spirits of disorder, the whites and their offspring, because the W and the V interchange. The name William is pronounced by some of them as Wilhelm or William, because the V and the W interchange, because V evolved into U, and then it evolved into double U, or two V's side by side. So when you look at the word law, it's L and W. That's the consonantal structure of the term, law. But because we understand that V and U and W are all from the same root and fundamentally the same letter, LW, law, is also LV, law or love. Love and law is the same word consonantally in English because they took our letters. Conceptually, it's the same term. That's why in ancient Kemet, meh meaning law is meh meaning love. It's the same thing. Now in our culture, based in true perspective, the word law and the word love, the concept is the same thing. When you're in law with someone, you're in love with someone, that means you're in law. You're in harmony with divine order with respect to your interaction with that thing or that object or that entity. So you're in harmony with that entity. You're in law with it. Law and love are the same word. In the European culture, they have corrupted law, meaning love, they corrupted that into lust. So lust is the perversion of love or law. Lust is a misguided desire that propels you towards disorder. That's a perversion of love. Most people sort of understand that there's a difference between love and lust. Love, somebody being drawn in a harmonious way to someone of the opposite sex, that's a harmonious interaction. And it can be a lawful interaction because it's lawful, then it's loveful or lovely or whatever. But if you're lusting like a rapist, that's not a harmonious interaction, that's a perverse, misguided desire to destroy and control and so forth. So there's a difference between love and lust. Law and love are the same word in our cultures. It's the same concept in our cultures. There's a difference between, and when we're talking about love, we're talking about law. We're not talking about sensuality, sexual arousal, reproductive capacity to generate beauty and geometrical forms that are in harmony with divine order. That's the domain of who we call Afi, as well as Amen Man in Akan. She's called Het Heru, and he's called Men or Minu Amen in ancient Kemet. And that's Oshun and Orisha Oko when they're husband and wife in the Yoruba tradition. Sexuality, sensuality based on divine order, reproductive capacity that generates beauty, that manifests beauty, which is the expression of divine order. That's the domain of Oshun, Afi, Het Heru. When we're talking about love, we're talking about law, and that's the domain of Ma'a and Ma'at. That is the expansive pole of divine order. Through love or law, you attract your balance or your complement, and then as you attract your balance or your complement, then your energy expands. It's the expansive pole of divine order. Law is the instrument through which you attract balance to your life. It's like love is the instrument through which you attract your complement or your balance to your life. Is because love is law, and law is the instrument through which you attract balance to your life. When you adhere to law, you attract balance to your life, and then you can draw on the resources of Amen, Amenet, Inyamewa, Inyame to expand your sphere of influence because you increase your spiritual power. So through law, you attract balance to your life, and then you can operate in harmony with divine order. That's why law and love are the same concept. Now that's that's why they are expansive. Now the contractive pole of divine order is hate. So just like law expands, hate is the contractive pole. If you look at yourself physiologically, your immune system, and it has two poles, the immune system and lymphatic system, these are the contractive poles. So your immune system cells seek out the cancerous cells. You may have approximately about 1 out of every 100,000 cells in your body at any given time become cancerous. And the reason why all of us, of course, are not dying of cancer all at the same time is because we have an immune system function response, where the cells seek out, destroy, and expel the cancerous cells from the body on a regular basis. They contract. It's a contractive function. They are the resolutionaries. They seek out and destroy for the maintenance of the whole. So the contractive pole is hate. Hate is repulsion. It's rejection. It's rejecting disorder for the purpose of maintaining divine order. That's what divine hate is. Divine hate, as a definition, is the divine rejection of disorder for the purpose of maintaining the integrity of the divine order. The agent and agentess within your body of the divine hate of the Supreme Being is your immune system, your lymphatic system. They reject disorder and disordered entities for the purpose of maintaining the divine order. You could have all the various systems in your body working wonderfully, but if you don't have an immune system, then all of them will fall apart almost instantly. So without that hate function, that rejection function, you don't have anything. It's the same thing in creation. There are forces in creation that maintain the integrity of the divine order, kind of like a magnetic force that holds everything together. This is Heru Behudet and Sekhmet, who we call Abenaa and Abenaa in the Akan tradition. So let's look at the etymology of the term hate. Now the term in English, hate, is typically traced back to the Greek word ketos. Ketos becomes ket or hate in English. Now the term actually has its etymological origins in our languages. Before Greeks existed, we were using this term. So it has nothing to do with them. It passes through them because they learned the language from us, they learned about the Abosom from us, and they began to repeat different words, thousands of words, phrases, names of divinities, kept them in their language, and then began to promote them as words that have origins in their language. For example, the name Heru, which is the son of Alsar and Alset, as well as other different Heru divinities, the etymological origin of the term in English, hero, Hero, is actually Heru from ancient Kemet. Now, and hero means someone who saves, someone who saves the day, someone who protects, and so forth. All of that is conceptually dealing with Heru, who, after Asar was killed, Heru was born through immaculate conception. His whole purpose in life is to come up and restore, save, or redeem the country and the world from the disordered rule of the followers of Set. So the whole concept of a hero comes from Heru, and even the name phonetically comes from Heru. Most of the time when you look in an etymological dictionary for the root of the term hero, you won't find the root being Heru. They don't talk about that. The same thing with the term Amen. Of course, we know that Christians say Amen at the end of their false prayers. Jews say Amen at the end of their false prayers. Arabs say Amin at the end of their false prayers. But when you look at these different terms, they typically will not tell you the truth about the name, which is, of course, Amen. But of course, they don't say Amen, Amenet at the end of their prayers. They just say Amen. So, and that, of course, deals with their warped mentality, their disordered, imbalanced mentality. And even Amen is not really shouldn't be the end of a prayer in the first place. But etymologically, they don't give you that origin. It's the same thing with the term hate, and it's also the same thing with the term law. But the term hate, they don't give you that origin. They'll stop with the Greek and the Latin, and sometimes they'll deal with the Proto-Indo-European so-called roots, but there are no roots for the term hate in Proto-Indo-European languages. It goes back to ancient Kemet. So kedos is the root that you'll find if you look on in an etymological dictionary online, or if you have a physical copy. They'll trace it back to kedos, they'll trace it back to kedian or ked, but usually kedos, dealing with loss, anguish, sorrow, and so forth, but also meaning to break or destroy. Why does kedos have these meanings? And then by the time it transfers into English, the os at the end, which is a Greek linguistic device, is dropped, and then you have het, or hate in English. It's because the root ket, or ked in ancient Kemet, means to break or destroy, but it also means pain, anguish, sorrow, loss, and so forth. The exact same meanings in ancient Kemet, and just like Heru became Hor in Coptic, Horos in Greek, because they added the os at the end. Osar became Osaros or Osiris in Greek, because they added the os at the end. Ked or het become kedos in Greek, because they added the os at the end, and then in English the os again is dropped and it goes back to the same root, but it's a different corrupt pronunciation. So it has the exact same meanings in ancient Kemet, ket or chet. Now there's a medut. It basically looks like a black circle. In the orthography, it's always translated as a KH combination. So it can be ka, but it can also be cha. And that black circle represents that sound. And that's the first part of the term ket or ked, but it also can be chet or ched. Now the KH combination, having cha or ka as the pronunciations of that symbol, this is where we get in English the CH combination. And by the way, all of this information can be found in the Madanechi Divine Law and Divine Hate series, parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we're going over this, but the details are all in that text that's on the website. So the CH combination in English, that combination can be pronounced cha, as in the word check or change, but it can also be pronounced ka, as in the terms chrome or chronology. It can also be pronounced sh, like in chagrin or in Charlotte. But the most common pronunciations are either the ka or the cha. The reason why the CH combination has those two pronunciations is because they're derived directly from the medut that black circle, which is pronounced ka or cha. So in ancient Kemet, the word for hate is ket or chet. Sometimes it's pronounced ki or chi. And that's important because in the Akan language, the word for hate is chi. So it's the same word, chi, meaning to hate, to abhor, to loathe, to abominate. Chi in Akan comes from chi or chet or ket in Kemet, and that became ket, dos in Greek, and het or hate in English. So I'm showing you the etymological origin of the word because we have to first show that it has nothing to do with European languages. And then we need to understand there's also a variation. Chet can also be, there's a variation of cher, K-H-R, cher, or chie, or chiri. So it can be chere, kere, ket, ket, or chi, chiri. That's important because there are two pronunciations in Akan as well. Chi meaning to hate and chiri meaning to hate. The ch and the r together. Chiri, like K-H-I-R-I, but it's really K-Y-I-R-A and chui. Chiri, or as well as chi. And in ancient Kemet is kere or chere, as well as ket or chet, which can also be pronounced chi or ki. It's the same word in both languages, both dialects, the same meaning for all of them. Now, the reason why all that is important is because these terms, chi or chiri, exist within the names of Heru Behudet and of Sekhmet. One of the titles of Sekhmet is Sekhet or Setchet or Setchi, and that means the S portion means to cause or to bring, and chet or chi or ki means hate or destruction, because to hate is to reject, to hate is to destroy, to hate is to overthrow, to hate is to repulse. All those things are tied up in the original meaning of the term hate, and they also carry those connotations even into through Greek, Latin, and English. So Sekhmet or Sekhet or Setchi means the bringer of destruction, the one who overthrows, the bringer of fire, the bringer of hate. Heru Behudet has the title Heru Hedi Ket. And Heru Hedi Ket means Heru, the Hedi, the chief or master of Ket, of destruction, hate, overthrowing the enemy, and so forth. There's Katiyu or Ketiyu or Chitiyu, which means the deities who destroy the enemies of Ra. We have many, many titles for the term that include in the names of different divinities where the term for hate is part of their actual names. We also have in Akan Achi De or Achi Wadie. Adie means things, objects, deeds, entities. Chi, of course, means to hate. So Echide or Echiwadie means those things, objects, deeds, or entities, adie, that are chi, hated by the Abosom and the NANASOM and Samafo. These are what in English are called taboos. In Yoruba culture they're called ewa. But these are taboos, divine prohibitions, divine restrictions, things that are hated, divinely hated by the Supreme Being. Achiwadye means the Abosom hate this. For example, a social achiwadye or divinely hated thing is rape or incest. This is hated by the Abosom. That's why they're called echiwadye, things, objects, deeds, or entities, adye, that are hated, chi, by the Supreme Being, and therefore by the Abosom and the NANASOM and Samafo, and they are things that we should stay away from, we should never engage in, and if we do engage in them, then there are Abosom, some of whom are called Odwirafo Abosom, meaning in English, divine executioners, divine killers. So we have Abosom, deities, in our Akan culture called the Odwirafo Abosom, the divine killers, the divine executioners, who are sent out to kill people who engage in perversity like rape and murder and things like that, unjustified killing. There's a difference between killing, justifiably and unjustified killing, which is murder. So murder, rape, incest, child molestation, homosexuality, dissexuality, these are echiwadie, things that are divinely hated, and the word hate is within the terminology. That shows divine hate. We also, in part 3 of MMARA, you'll find that we have the medutu for the term, another term, mesut, means hate or hatred, and ntoro means divinity, so mesut ntoro means the person or thing that is hated by the ntoro. It means divine hate. So all of that is in the text. But I just want to give you the etymological origin of the term chi and chiri, which is chet and chede in ancient Kemet, chi and chiri and Akan, which means to hate, and that chit became ket, kedos, and hate in English. But these are titles of Heru Behudet and Sekhmet. They are the Abosom, male and female, of divine hate. So you have divine order, which has two poles, the expansive pole and the contractive pole. The expansive pole of order is law. The contractive pole of order is hate. And remember, law and love is the same thing. So the world is created through law, meaning love, meaning an expression of divine order. The world is maintained through hate, an impression of divine order. Divine hate impresses or imprints upon the created order the parameters within which we are to operate harmoniously. If we step outside those parameters, then we get crushed. It's the same thing with the immune system. It impresses upon the body the parameters within which the cells must operate harmoniously. If they operate outside of those parameters, then the immune system cells come and imprint or impress their role by crushing those cells and expelling them from the body. So law is the expression of order. When you look at law, it's an expression of an order. The alphabetical order, if you say put something in order, in alphabetical order, then you have to think about what are the laws of the alphabet. B comes after A, C comes after B, and so forth. And those laws are an expression of the order that you were trying to establish. So law is the expression of order, and when you see a harmonious civilization governed by specific laws, the laws that are put in place, male and female complementarity, raising children in harmony with divine order, all these different things, these laws are expression of the order of Inyame wa Inyame, and therefore you have a harmonious society. Hate is the impression of order. So you can't just have a lawful society that's perpetual or perpetuated if you don't have a military structure that impresses or preserves or imprints upon the society the laws that they are built upon. Then it collapses, because as soon as somebody gets outside of the law, then people begin to run amok. So you have to have an expression of order and an impression of order. Ma'a and ma'at, the male and female abosom of law, are the expression of order. Heru Behudet and Sekhmet, Abenaa and Abenaa, are the male and female abosom who are the impression of order. So before we go forward, are there any questions on law and hate as the expansive and contractive poles? And by the way, because law, meaning love, remember we said meh means love, meh means law, and the LV and the LW are the same. Because there are actually abosom, divinities, or risha of law, meaning love, which is ma'a and ma'at. This is why there's no such thing as this foolish notion of falling in love and falling out of love. You don't fall into a abosom and fall out of an abosom. You don't fall into ma'at, a divinity, a female force in nature that you can communicate with. You don't fall into ma'a, a divinity. And by the way, ma'at in ancient Kemet is the Orisha Odu in Yoruba, the female Orisha Odu in Yoruba tradition. You don't fall into her and fall out of her. You can fall in and out of lust, and that's what the Akradinbosom are talking about when they're talking about falling in and out of love and giving us that foolish concept. But in law, you harmonize with the law, and if you get outside of law, you try to restore order through ritual practice. That's what ancestral religion is about. But any questions about that before we go forward? Let me check. Okay. All right. So now we understand that, in general, that the divine order itself is composed of, just like your body, your immune system is the divine hate functionary within your body. It preserves or imprints upon your body the divine parameters of divine order. That is an agent. It's actually a shrine. Your immune system, lymphatic system are shrines for Benaa and Abenaa within your body. And in the great divine body of the Supreme Being, Benaa and Abenaa execute the same function. They hold the whole universe together through impressing that order that was established in the beginning. Our culture is the divine acceptance of order and the divine rejection of disorder. That's what culture, or our way of life, is. In Akan language, Amambere, Aman means nation, Bere means way of life. Amain Bere or Amambre means culture, means the way of the nation, the way of the people. And our culture, or our way, is the divine acceptance of order and the divine rejection of disorder. When you accept order and establish a society rooted in the laws that govern order, or you establish laws that reflect order, then you're accepting order into your life, accepting order into your society. And then when you reject disorder, then that means you've established a society, it's rooted in divine order, you have laws that govern that society based on what your function is individually, your divine function individually, based on your cry and your relationship to Inyame wa Inyame, as we talked about before, and your collective Nkrabia, your collective function as a group, living in harmony with divine order, what you're here to do in the world, and you establish laws that reflect that, but then you have to have practices and mechanisms in place to reject disorder so that the order that you establish is not upset or overturned. So our culture, Afurakani Afurai Kaitni, ancestral culture, no matter what the ethnic group on the continent is and where we have migrated to around the world, fundamentally and always at root is the acceptance of order and the rejection of disorder. So it's expansion and contraction. Now, let's deal specifically with Abenaa. Abenaa, just like the different Abosom of the days of the week, the third day of the week is Abenaada or Abenaada. Da means day, so it is the day of Benaa and the day of Abenaa. They operate through the planet, the Ochin Nsoroma, or the planet Benaa or Abenaa, which in English is called the planet Mars. The sacred color of Abenaa or Sekhmet is typically red, also red and white. So one of the reasons for that is the planet Abenaa is called the red planet because it appears as red. It's called the planet that deals with war, fire, and so forth, because these are warrior and warrioress Abosom divinities. So her color is red and white. She operates through the lymphatic system, the military structure within the body, waging war against the cancerous cells, the toxins and bacteria streaming in from the outside, and disfigured cells developing within the inside to become cancerous, who begin to proliferate and try to consume and destroy the other cells, and she goes and attacks those and destroys those. So, in fact, the major text dealing with Sekhmet is what they call the Book of the Heavenly Cow, or the Book of the Cow of Heaven, the Celestial Cow, and so forth. Sometimes they call it the Destruction of Mankind, and it talks about when Ra's ruling the world, then a certain group of men and women, disordered men and women, began to attack Ra and talk negatively about Ra polluting the life force energy that governs creation. So Ra takes into council, he asks the different Abosom to come into council. And the Abosom come into council, including his father, Nu, and he says the other Tepiel Abosom, or the other Abosom, who are his ancestors and ancestresses. And he says to his father, Nu, these men and women are blaspheming me, or talking negative, projecting negative energy into the world. I want to slay them, but first, mark out a plan for me. What would you do in this matter? Because I won't move until I get your advice about what I should do. So this is the creator of the universe, Ra, who we call the Yon component Akan, Odumare in Yoruba, Ra and Da in Bodun. Ra and Ra'et are the creator and creatress. But the creator of the universe asks his father and the other ancestress and ancestor divinities, Abosom, for counsel before he moves on the disordered entities. Now that's instructive for us because we ask our NANASOM and Samanfo, our ancestresses and ancestors who are honorable, who have experience, for guidance on major life matters. So that's interesting for two reasons. Our culture is a replication of divine order. If the creator of the universe can ask for guidance from his ancestresses and ancestors, we as children of the creator of the universe should be doing the same thing, because it's just natural. We have that natural inclination. It also shows that Ra, the creator, as well as Ra'et, they have a mother and a father, and we talked about that in the very first session, NANASOM ne Amamre, that Amen and Amenet, the great supreme being, are the mother and father of all, and Ra and Ra'et proceed from them, and they are functionaries of the supreme being. So the creator and the creatress are functionaries of the supreme being, Amen and Amenet. So when he asks for that counsel, they say basically, you're in harmony with order, send your Arit out, and she will go and attack the disordered men and women and destroy them. So Sekhmet comes forward out of the Arit, or the eye of Ra, and she goes down and slaughters, massacres the perverse men and women, the men and women who are engaged in disorder and so forth. And she says, it was sweet to my heart. We have the whole translation of the text on the website. So after that, there's some different things that take place, but the most important part is the creator of the universe gets divine sanction to send Sekhmet out to destroy the disordered men and women. Before we go forward, I saw a couple of comments. Okay. Okay, that's a good question. Before we go forward, brother asked, where did the notion of unconditional love come from? Right? Now, he said, did the cracker come up with this? And of course the answer is yes. There's no such thing as unconditional love, because there's no such thing as unconditional law. Law is the basis of that which is conditional. Law means conditions. Law represents the conditions placed on the created order by divinity. That's what it is an expression of. So if you have conditions, laws mean you can do this, but you can't do that. That's conditioning. That's a condition. So when we understand, of course, in the language we said meh means law in Coptic, meh means love in Coptic, because law and love is the same thing. We also showed that LV and LW, love and law, is the same word and concept in English because it derives from our ancient language. Then we understand that law and love is equal. There's no such thing as unconditional law. That's foolishness. The reason why the Odwirafo want us to believe in a foolish concept of unconditional love, or just embracing all things without condition, is because after thousands of years of invading our culture, our societies getting crushed for thousands of years militarily, then they began to try to infiltrate incrementally into the different centers of civilization in Northeast Africa, North Africa, in Southern Europe, in Southern Asia, and eventually, by the time they migrated to North, Central, and South America and the Caribbean, and came in contact with us because we had been here for thousands of years prior to the existence of the whites and their offspring on Earth. And then, of course, when they migrated over there, they came in contact. They tried to wage war against us again. But what happened was, after being crushed militarily, they realized that the only way that they could take control of our societies and maintain control was if not only would they exploit divisions within society that were already there before they got there and try to play and capitalize on one group against the other, one disgruntled group against the other, but they had to pervert the cosmology. And the way you pervert the cosmology is through perverting the ancestral religion. So of course, when the Greeks invaded ancient Kemet, they took over the northern portion. They gained a foothold in the northern portion of Kemet. You will see from that point that the images of the divinities begin to change from ancient Afurakaitnit depictions. There are still some that are Afurakaitnit, then there are others that are the images of the white Greeks themselves. They put their images there. They started dressing up like our ancestresses and ancestors, putting themselves in tombs, in temples, on papyri, sarcophagi, all over the place. And then they start infecting the culture with these false notions of divine love, meaning unconditional love, acceptance of all things. Hate is evil. Hate is a lower vibration, and you shouldn't be focused on that because you won't understand how to focus on your divine intuition and all this other foolishness. And we have people, of course, in the churches who teach that, turn the other cheek. All of that stuff is all based on, they had to figure out a way for us to surrender without fighting them, because if we were to live in harmony with divine order, we would recognize that the enemy is supposed to be exterminated. That's divine order. The cancerous cells in the body are exterminated. They're not embraced. They're not, looked at as, well, they're just all body cells and they're all in the same body, so we should all embrace. They're killed. That's what should happen to them. So when you understand that, and you understand that the whites and their offspring are just cancerous cells in the divine black body of humanity, then we understood that they needed to be exterminated. So we always waged war against them and we exterminated them. So the only thing they could do after that was to try to corrupt the cosmology. And the way you corrupt the cosmology is to teach people that you shouldn't hate anything, you shouldn't reject anything, you should embrace everything. You find that in Christianity, you find that in various forms of Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Taoism, all that Eastern misinformation that's not part of our ancient culture. No matter what some people try to promote as our ancient culture in India, we were practicing the exact same culture in ancient India pre-Aryan invasion that we were practicing in Afuraka before we migrated to India. So we carried the same culture with us, and it did not include anything about unconditional love because that's foolishness. But if you turn the other cheek, accept everything that happens to you, that's just the baseline for Europeans to be able to maintain control in areas that they invaded and not have to worry about any retaliation. So they had to encode that into the false religious scriptures like the Bible, Quran, Talmud, and all these other different false scriptures, Bhagavad Gita, Dhammapadas, and so forth. The same thing happens, not ancient America, but in pre-European America, when the white migrant agents invaded our cultures. They began to imitate our people, as we said in the past, imitate the dress, imitate the rituals, imitate everything, and now they erroneously refer to themselves as Native Americans. Now, all these migrant Asians, they're recent migrants from Asia. They're not native, they're not indigenous to anywhere. They're whites and their offspring. They're spirits of disorder, spirits without an Akra. But they all know that they are not indigenous. They know that they're not Native Americans. The ones who are higher ups who are dealing with legal issues and trying to repel, like for example the Cherokee, repelling the quote unquote Cherokee freedmen from the tribes, they know that we're not the same people. They've studied the DNA. They write articles and texts and all kinds of things and do presentations about the haplotypes that are found in Siberia and connected to Central Europe, and they know that there's a difference between us and them. They know that they weren't here before us, but they all call themselves indigenous and they call themselves natives, and they just perpetuate that lie because they're spirits of disorder. And they corrupt their tradition, our traditions as well, and in their fake traditions, which are a corrupted fragment of ours, they promote the unconditional love and great spirit embraces all people. That's total foolishness. Just like the sun shines on melanin dominant people, the sun shines on everybody. But if you are melanin recessive, you develop cancer from being in the sun. And if you're melanin dominant, it strengthens you. So that's when you talk about something universal. If you're in harmony with order, then the universal order balances you out. If you are a spirit of disorder, then you suffer because you're a spirit of disorder. And the reason you're a spirit of disorder is because you engage in behavior that caused the Okra to repel itself thousands of years ago, and you've been reincarnating as a spirit of disorder ever since. And will only stop when we, finally exterminate these spirits of disorder. But the whole notion of unconditional love is foolish when you understand that law and love are the same thing, and law in and of itself, by nature, by default, is conditioning. It's a condition. It's a conditioning of the created order. It shows the differences and unique characteristics between different Afurakani, Afuraikani ethnic groups, different plant life, animal life, mineral life, and so forth. The laws that govern our physiological makeup dictate that yes, we do need H2O. We need water. Fish need H2O. They need water. But the laws that govern our physiological makeup place conditions on the manner in which we intake H2O, and the laws that govern their physiological makeup place conditions on the manner in which they can take in H2O. So they can't take it in the same way we do. If we try to breathe underwater, of course, we die. If they try to take in oxygen the same way we do, they suffocate, they die. Through asphyxiation, they die. So law in and of itself is conditioning. So all of that, yes, is based on them trying to control us and getting us not to reject them, because if we reject them, then they're set up for extermination. And they can, of course, rule if they're, being exterminated. All right. So just want to check to see if there was another question on that. Okay, and we just want to say that now the details about this information, all the details of the information you'll find for people who just joined, in the MMARA, Divine Law and Divine Hate, parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And all the details about the different Abosom you'll find on the Akradinbosom page. Let me type that in now. In fact, okay, if you go to the AKANFO NANASOM page, you'll find articles, the MMARA, parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You'll find a link to the Akradinbosom page. There's articles on all of the 11 Akradinbosom, including Abenaa. So you'll find all that information there. So let's look more into Abenaa. Abenaa, again, is Sekhmet. We said her sacred colors are red and white. She operates through the planet Abenaa, or Benaa, which they call Mars. She's a warrioress. She's a healer. She's a divine killer, divine executioner. If you look at the name Abenaa she's also called Abraba. So Benaa is also pronounced Bera or Bra. So Abraba is another pronunciation of her name. The Benaa becomes contracted. Bena, Bra. The letter N and the letter R, the R with the rolling R, the tongue tapping the roof of the mouth once, Bena and Bera becomes the same term. So Abenaa, Abra, Abraba, Abenawa, there are different variations of the term. It's important because Abenaa or Abra is also related to the term Obra, and Obra in Akan is one of the terms for the menses, meaning menstruation. Odwirafo are the group of people, fo, who are in the Obra state, meaning the menstrual state. The Obra dine meaning place, or room, or dwelling place. Obra dine, the dwelling place of the people who are in the menstrual cycle. That sometimes women who are menstruating at the same time connect in the Obra dine, or the menstrual cycle, divine sacred cycle dwelling for ritual practice. Obra, meaning the menses, is the same as Obra or Abenaa, the Abosom Abenaa. Why is that? Because Sekhmet is the Abosom who governs menstruation. We have a 3-part series on Sekhmet, Obra, Obosom, meaning Sekhmet, the menstruation goddess. She spills blood through war, but she also spills blood through menstruation. It's a cleansing. She's a great divine healer. So she's the killer, but she's also a healer. Her priests and priestesses are called Sunut, which in ancient Kamit means physicians. So her priests and priestesses were also physicians at the same time. Another term for menstruation in Chui, in the Akan language, is Asechima. And if you look at the root Asechima, that's the same as Sekima or Sekimat or Sekhmet. So the word for menstruation in Akan is Sechima, and the name of the Abosom, or the deity of menstruation in ancient Kamit, is Sekimat or Sekhmet. Also, well, you have Sekhmet, but also in Akan, Sechima is not just the word for menstruation, and Obra is the other word for menstruation, but those are also titles. So when girls go through the menstruation process, when they first have their first menses, then there's a celebration, and it's called Bragoro, and then that leads to womanhood training. And when they're going through womanhood training, this is a sacred set of processes for the girls, because the menstruation process is not something that's dirty or filthy or something that people don't look forward to and all this other stuff. It's a time when the woman on a monthly basis gets connected to Sechima, the Abosom of menstruation, the Abosom of the divine hate of the Supreme Being, which cleanses the earth, cleanses your body, which is a miniature earth, and so forth. So this is a sacred connection to this Abosom. It's also a connection to Asase Afua and Asase Ya, the Earth Mother. So there are ritual practices that are engaged in by the females during this time. So, but it starts off, of course, when they have their first menses. Then they're ready, they're eligible to go through womanhood training. When they're going through womanhood training, they are given one of two titles. Typically, the girls are all either called Sechima, or they're called Obra Ni. Ni meaning to be, and Obra in the menstrual state. So they're one of the Obra Ni, or the Obra people, the people who are now in the menstrual phase of life, but they're also basically being called Obra or Abra or Abenaa. All the girls are called either Abenaa, Obra, or they're called Sechima. So all girls in Akan culture, once they get into the menstrual phase of life, are either called Sekhmet or Abenaa, basically, because they're named after they have the title of the goddess, the Abosom of menstruation. So both of those titles exist in ancient Kemet, They mean exactly the same thing. When you look at the term Heru Behudet or Heru Bedet, there are two pronunciations. Sometimes you hear Bedet, sometimes you hear Bedat. Now that's, of course, important because Bedat is Bedat or Benaa, and that's, of course, that's the Obosom Abenaa, which is Heru Behudet. Bene in Akan means to fight, to wage war, to strike. The Bene Fo are the group of people who wage war or strike. So Bene is a title of Benaa or Bera. So Heru Bedet or Heru Bedet, Heru Bene, Heru Benaa. We're basically saying Benaa and Akan is Bedet or Bera in ancient Kemet. It's the same title, talking about the same divinity, and it's talking about the same function. And you will find that Beda'at with a T at the end, which feminizes, is the same divinity in ancient Kemet. For example, in the temple of Edfu, you'll see an inscription. We have this inscription quoted in the article on Abenaa, the Abosom of Abenaa and Abenaada, talking about the goddess of Behudit or Behudet or Bedat or Bedet, which is Abenaa, which is Sekhmet. So she's called Beda or Bedet, Benaa in ancient Kemet. She's called Abenaa in Akan. Bede also means red. Ben means to become red by boiling. So you'll see that Sekhmet wears red and white. That comes from a couple of different things. The word for blood in Akan is Boja. Sometimes it's written Moja, but sometimes it's written Boja. Bo means stone. Ja means fire. So Boja, one of the definitions can be for your blood, can be the fire inside of the stone. Ba also means to create. So Boja can be the creative fire. But it's important about the fire within the stone because the lymphatic system, part of the immune response of the body, that is governed by Abenaa. If you look within the bone marrow, which is deep within the bones, the fire in the bones, the blood, and that includes the blood that gives, well, the bone marrow gives rise to endometrial cells, and it is the endometrium, the lining of the endometrium, that is shed during menstruation. So there's a direct connection from the bone marrow, the fire in the bones, Boja, the menstrual Boja, the lymphatic system, the lymphocytes and so forth, and the erythrocytes, red blood cells, white blood cells, are created within the bone marrow. So you'll see that Abenaa, she wears red or red and white. She operates within the bone marrow, the fire within the bones. That's where the lymphatic cells are. It's also where endometrial cells are created, which of course the endometrium is the lining that is shed during menstruation. So all of that is connected to Abenaa. Sekhmet, Abenaa, is also connected to being the wife of Ptah. In Akan, Ptah is called Obra. But Ptah is the fire at the center of the earth that fashions the created order. So you have Amen, Amenet, for the Supreme Being, Raz and Rayet are the divine living energy, animated all created entities in the universe. Ptah is the one that takes that divine energy and fashions it into specific forms to execute our specific objectives. He fashions the planets, sun, moon, stars, and so forth. He takes the creative life force energy of Ra and Rayet and fashions them into specific forms based on the laws of Ma'a and Ma'at, the conditions placed on creation by the Supreme Being through the agency of Ma'a and Ma'at. He uses that and fashions the universe. Ptah is found at the innermost core of Earth, and Sekhmet is found in connection with Ptah at the inner core of Earth as well. So just like Boja, the fire in the stone, or this great mineral, Earth, the fire in the stone is where you can find Sekhmet, just like you can find her, the fire in the stone. The stone structure in your body is the skeletal system, and the fire inside the marrow, where you can find the lymphocytes, the white blood cells, and the erythrocytes being manufactured, is where you can find the feminine fire that manifests in the red and white sacred colors, which is Sekhmet, and she's a fire in the bones, and she's also connected to the menstrual cycle because she governs that cycle. It's important to note that there's an Abosom that governs the menstrual cycle. That means that all the information out in so-called spiritual or conscious literature talking about the menstrual cycle is, unnecessary, or it's a manifestation of a disease or a disorder in the body, and once you get your diet right and you get your mind right, you won't have a menstrual cycle. All of that information has been simply copied from European sources, from the whites and their offspring, and then we put it in African-centered, Afrocentric journals and books and publications. We repeat it, then we retroactively date that information to ancient Kemet and say this is what our ancestresses and ancestors taught in ancient Kemet. Now, of course, it's totally inaccurate. What our ancestresses and ancestors taught in ancient Kemet and in ancient Kanit and wherever we went anywhere in the world is we invoke the Abosom, the goddess of menstruation, on a regular basis. So how are you invoking the actual Abosom and communicating with her on a regular basis, and at the same time saying the menstrual cycle is unnatural? That's again a ploy by Europeans trying to cut us off from divinities. That's one of the most sacred cycles that the Akradinbosom woman has. She's in connection with the force of nature on a monthly basis, and then that renews her connection with the Earth Mother on a monthly basis when she ritually disposes of some of the ancestral moja, ancestral blood. Every time you have a cycle, birth is taking place. Whether you have a cycle and you actually, the egg is fertilized and you eventually give birth, or when one of the ovum passes through and it's not quote unquote fertilized, but it is born into the world when you have a cycle. And there are NANASOM, NANASOM, Asamamfo Pa, ancestresses and ancestors who are connected to those hundreds and thousands of ova that are in your body. Of course, there are only a few hundred ova that you can actually release. If you look at from the time you first have your first menstrual cycle as a teenager, all the way until late 40s and early 50s, till you go through menopause or Obra, the ending of the Obra cycle or the menopause. If you calculate it, there's only a certain number of ovum that can be released monthly on that cycle throughout the course of about a 35-year period. So if you can only release a few hundred of those ova, why do you have hundreds of thousands of ova within your body? Why do you develop hundreds of thousands of them? What are they for? They're not just spares, they're not just extra. These are shrines for NANASOM, Asamamfo Pa, for our ancestresses and ancestors. And females, you give birth to ancestresses and ancestors on a monthly basis. All through that whole time that you're going through you're in the Obra phase of life. So when those ovum are released, they're ancestresses and ancestors who are connected to them. And sometimes those spirits, when they're released, become earthbound, or sometimes they become protectors. Sometimes they return to the ancestral realm, where you bring ancestral spirits into the world on a regular basis. When the Obra happens, or the end of the menstrual cycle happens, and you no longer are releasing that on a monthly basis, one of the reasons why they say that females who have finished with the whole menstrual process are more powerful, they'll often say, well, they're more prone to be Abiesa or Iyaami and so forth, and it's often given a negative connotation, which is really not. One of the reasons why they can exercise much more Bayi or higher psychic power or Aj is because they have birthed a number of ancestral spirits in the world over the past 35 years that they have influence over, because these are their family members. So they have sometimes a literal army of spirits that they can call on and exercise influence over in harmony with order. But then some people, of course, they bring disordered spirits into the world. Depends on your relationship with your Obra and your family Abosom and so forth. But the general principle is you have a connection to thousands of ancestral spirits, and some of them you bring into the world through the menstrual process. So that's a sacred cycle. So that's the reason why you have to learn ritual practices from the elder women, elderest women in the culture, in the society. That's why in our Akan culture, they have Odwirafo, the people who are in that phase of life. Obra dying, dwelling place for the Obra. It's not the people in that Obra state. It's not just about uncleanliness and foolishness like that. There are reasons for certain restrictions during that time, but it has to do with the sacredness of the cycle and the spirits that are connected to that cycle and how to interact with them. In the 3-part series, Sekhmet, Obra Abosom, Menstruation Goddess, we go into detail about all of that. Okay, let me see if somebody has a question. Okay. One brother mentioned, and there's a similar process. Remember, we talk about Sekhmet. In certain aspects, Sekhmet is connected with Ptah as husband and wife, but at the same time, Sekhmet is connected with Heru Behudet. Benah and Abenaa are connected that way. But when Sekhmet is connected with Ptah, operating as the feminine aspect of the fire within the core of the earth, Ptah and Sekhmet are called Oboade and Sechima and Akan. In Yoruba, you have Obaluae, which is Ptah, and you have Iyaami Abeni, which is the same as Abenaa, but Iyaami Abeni, she's also called Edan, which is Sekhmet in Yoruba. And then in Fon and Vodou, you have the Sakbata twins, Dada Zoji and Inyokwe Ananu. But they're called the Sakbata or Sakamata twins because this is Sakmat or Sekhmet. Sakmata or Sekhmeta twins. This is Ptah and Sekhmet. And they govern epidemics, but they also govern healing. So, and let's get into that just, partially. When they talk about Sekhmet governing epidemics, she uses epidemics to exercise divine order, to exercise that function of wiping out disordered cells, disordered entities, disordered practices on a communal scale. So you'll find prayers and texts and things like that talking about Sekhmet using disease to wipe out disorder on a pandemic level. You'll hear about Ptah, read about Ptah, for example, in the Battle of Pelusium, using an epidemic to wipe out the Assyrian army. You'll find Oboade and Akan, but you also find Obaluae and Sakpata in Yoruba, and then Sakpata and Vodun being Orisha, or the Vodou that governs epidemics. They use the epidemics to wage war against disordered entities on a large scale. If you look at plagues in Europe, for example, about 700 years ago, there was a Black Death in Europe, what they call in the 1300s. Within 3 to 5 years, about 1/3 to 1/2 of the entire population of Europe was wiped out by the Black Death. Now, they'll say that, well, it was just the black rat carried a pest and carried it through Europe, and it just caused all different kinds of maladies. And of course, people in Europe didn't bathe and they were very filthy. That was just their culture as Achiwadifo spirits of disorder. So it mushroomed and it spread very quickly. But if you look at the writings during the time, some of the people, when they were going through it and seeing that thousands of bodies would be in the street, and they would be writing about how bodies were piled up, Of course, the Europeans were, cannibalizing the dead bodies and babies and everything else. That's who they are. But you'll find that some of them also wrote that they knew that this had to do with people practicing some form of witchcraft, but they didn't go into detail. This is one of those instances, very much like during the Battle of Pelusium, when Ptah sent rodents to attack the shields of the Assyrian army in the middle of the night. And once these shields were attacked, then the Assyrian army couldn't defend themselves, so the army was routed. What that's saying is Ptah used rodents to attack the shield or the immune system of the armies and caused plague and wiped out the army with the plague, and that was, protected Kamit from that particular invasion. That's the same thing as saying Obalue using the plague to wage war, Sakpata using plagues to wage war, Sekhmet using plagues to wage war. So you have people in Southern Europe, Europeans were gaining in strength and influence, and then the plague hits them, wipes out 1/3 to 1/2 of their population, and they went into a couple of hundred years of just stagnant, quote-unquote, development. They've never been developed. But as far as getting their foothold in different parts of the world, that was truncated. About 700 years prior to that, there was the plague of what they call the plague of Justinian, and it wiped out a large portion of Europe as well. So you had that plague of Justinian, it wiped them out. 700, and they went into what they call the Dark Ages for about 500 years. Then they started stirring in Europe again. They started gaining some influence, and then they got hit by a plague 700 years later, and it wiped them out. And then they started trying to gain their footing back, and now that was 700 years ago. So now we're 700 years out again. So you have the plague of Justinian, 700 years later, the Black Death, 700 years later is now. And we're in a very similar situation where the Europeans have started gaining influence again, especially over the past 100 years. If you look at, Afuraka, they didn't start gaining control over different countries on the continent until the late 12,800s, or what they call the late 1800s. Prior to that, even though enslavement was going on, they were on the outskirts trying to influence the civil wars that were going on within different Afurakaini societies, and they were purchasing, selling guns, joining on one side against the other side, and capturing enslaved people in the process. They weren't strong enough, like we talked about before, just to invade Afuraikai, take over and snatch people up. They had to have some help. They had to have, people, a disordered societies in conflict, and they would get inside the conflict and make their, deals that way. So now they're, over the past 100 years, they've gained control. They're dominant culturally in different parts of the world. They're starting to lose some of their dominance, but they're still dominant culturally in different parts of the world. So now we're up into this next 700 years has passed again. Now it's time for some of the people who are talking about Sekhmet and Ptah and Obalue and so forth. People, if you're really dealing with these Abosom, then you invoke them the same way your ancestresses and ancestors did, and start utilizing that weapon that they use, which is pandemics. They've used that. Those pandemics didn't destroy our people. They destroyed the whites and their offspring. So that goes into chemical and biological warfare, DNA, genetics, people studying melanin, studying Abatun, learning how to look at the structure of the Achiwadifo and use spiritual warfare, chemical and biological warfare to defend ourselves against them, where the same chemical and biological agents won't affect us negatively. They'll be strengthening for us, just like sunlight, but deadly for them. So people need to be focused on those kind of things. When you're invoking Sekhmet, when you're invoking Abenaa, invoking these different Abosom, if you're really connecting with them, they will give you those kind of ideas in your own okra. One person going into the forest and getting some, combination of some mineral, plant, glandular, or some combination of thereof, and some bacterium, and releasing that, which will have no ill effect upon us, will be destructive, totally destructive for the whites and their offspring. That can happen with one person. That can just happen by somebody listening to the Akra, listening to the Abosom, and doing what they need to do. And that can begin another black death for the Odwirafo just from nature. Those are kind of things we can focus on. It wouldn't matter how many tanks, bombs, planes, or whatever they have, it wouldn't matter, because one virus could take them all down. And if that was just one individual, there could be 10,000 individuals all around the world, wherever Odwirafo are, listening to the Abosom and following what their Abosom tell them. If their Abosom gives them agent or a mixture, and they listen to the Abosom, then it's wide open for what we can do. So let me see about some of these questions. All right, so one question came up with regard to albinos, and some of this information, of course, when you go on the site, you'll see, the details about this. But albino, black albino, somebody born from a black mother, black father, and they're an albino. Externally, they're depigmented. They can't produce melanin at the normal levels and quality, so their skin is pink, white. They have light eyes, and they have depigmented hair, which is blonde hair, and they can't deal with the sun properly, and so forth. So internally, they have the same stores of melanin that we do, abatum that we do, and they also still have an okra, so they're still connected. What defines us as Afro-Akani people fundamentally is the fact that we have an Akra, we have a soul, a divine consciousness, and of course, that manifests as externally in our structure and our inheritance and so forth. The Odwirafo are those who separated from the larger group because of disorder. They repelled their Akras, we talked about in the very first session, and because they repelled their Akra, they no longer have Akra, they keep reincarnating. It will never get, the Akra is gone, just like a drop of water returning to the ocean, and it's back in the ocean. Once the Akra disengaged thousands of years ago, that was done. These are spirits of disorder. They're going to continue to operate as spirits of disorder until we make them extinct. So, since they don't have an Akra, when they separated and migrated or were drawn into northern Eurasia, then they lost their pigmentation. Their spiritual degeneration precipitated the physiological degeneration. So that's why they're depigmented, and then their morphology, bone structure and so forth, became corrupt and perverse, and that's why they look the way they do. It's not just they moved to a different climate. When the so-called Eskimos moved up into the Arctic, they'll talk about, you can look at an article about the Arctic Twa in African presence in early Europe, for example. They talk about finding or coming in contact with, the Twa people, basically small black people, small statured black people up in the Arctic before, the migrant agent got there. So, it's not just moving to a cold climate that will cause someone to depigment. We've lived in cold climates, but you have to, what creates a European, nature will never create a spirit of disorder. There will be alterations. For example, the Khoi people, the San people who live in the Kalahari or live further south in Afuraka, sometimes the temperatures can become freezing in those regions. So you'll see that they're a little bit lighter than people who live closer to the equator. But they still have the same features. They still have an Okra. They still are melanin dominant. They're just a little bit lighter brown than other Afurakanu, and then they migrated up into Asia and so forth. But it's not just the climate, or nature will never create a melanin recessive spirit of disorder. Nature will never cause your Okra to repel from you. Only the individual engaged in disorder going outside of the parameters of the established orders we talked about in the beginning, only that will cause your Akra to repel, and now you're a spirit of disorder and you manifest disorder. So albinos in and of themselves in our community are not the same as Achiwadifo because they still have an Akra. Therefore, they're still connected to the Abosom, they're still connected to the NANASOM and Samafo, they're still connected to the Supreme Being. All right. Okay, so saw a couple of people talking about that. Okay, any questions about Abenaa, about Sekhmet? Because we're dealing with, and just going back to the beginning of the remarks, when you're talking about Abenaa and you're invoking Abenaa, you'll find all over the internet people talking about Sekhmet, temples to Sekhmet, Achiwadifo, white people, spirits of disorder, having little priests and priestesshoods talking about Sekhmet. Sekhmet has never communicated with not one Achiwadifo spirit of disorder any time in the past. She does not communicate with them now, and she will never communicate with them in the future. Just like, I mean, we've always used that explanation about having a large magnet and a small magnet on the table and the same polarities close to each other. The large magnet will repel the smaller one every time. It doesn't make a decision one day that, okay, today I'm not going to repel it. As soon as it gets close enough, it's repelled and it never gets a chance to even touch the larger magnet. Spirits of disorder are repelled by all of the Abosom. They're repelled by all of the NANASOM and Samafo. They're repelled by your own Akrawa. They're repelled by anything orderly in nature. And because they are repelled, then they're outside of the parameters of the created order, and then Sekhmet and Hadru Behudet can crush them, can make them, exterminate them. So no Achiwadifo, no white Latino, white Hindu, white European, white Asian, white American, so-called Native American, none of them have ever communicated with Sekhmet. Sekhmet has never communicated with them and never will. So all of those little temples and all those little rituals, that's all pure foolishness. The only thing they're doing is communicating with their dead relatives and passing these spiritual communications, which are not divinely spiritual. They're no different than communicating with somebody on a cell phone. It's unseen. You're using signals that are going back and forth in the air, but it's not spiritual. They're communicating with their dead relatives and calling this, spiritual communication and communication with divinities. So when we're dealing with this actual Abosom, this is an Abosom connected to us. Some people have that Abosom connected to their Akra, which they need to work with her on a more intense basis because that's part of their Akrabia, their divine function. But you need to understand that she just like other Abosom, came with us to the Western Hemisphere during the enslavement process. For those of us who are connected to her or any other Abosom, she never left. We're not dependent on, of course, other people from the continent to initiate us into an Abosom that's connected to us by blood. But of course, no Achiwadifo, no cracker knows anything about Sekhmet. They write books, they've looked at temples, wrote down things, imitated what they've seen, made comparisons with other cultures and tried to glean information from visiting other cultures and gathering a bunch of documentation. But they have never communicated with the Abosom. So don't be fooled by these sites and these so-called initiations and past life regressions and people talking about they've seen Sekhmet. Anybody can sit down and dream up anything in their imagination and lie to you and tell you they were communicating with this divinity. And we kind of went into details about, pseudo-spiritual communication when we talked about the Nsamanfo and, the spirits of disorder in the second part of the NANASOM MMARA series. But you need to understand that this is, of course, like all the Abosom are connected to us by blood, Afurakani people only. Okay. Okay, there was a question about people practicing yoga and if that can stop the menstrual cycle. And yes, it can do that. It's different things. People who work out, like sometimes females who are working out, getting prepared for the Olympics and things like that, they work out so intensely that they disrupt their natural cycle. That's because they're engaged in things that are unnatural. Just because you can stop something doesn't mean that it's natural. You can use antiperspirant and stop sweating. That doesn't mean you should. It means you can do that. Again, Sekhmet is the Abosom of menstruation. She is the Orisha of menstruation. There's a force in nature that governs the process. There's a reason why blood is released, an ova is released, ancestral spirits connected to the ova are released into the physical world, brought from the spirit realm into the physical world, and we need to connect with them. People in India, and you're talking about really it's the whites and their offspring in India who have no connection with Sekhmet, no connection with any Abosom. To them, a menstrual cycle is something that's a burden. So they want to do whatever they can to stop it. When they're doing yoga, that's not in and of itself a spiritual practice. It's no different than doing gymnastics. It's no different than stretching or exercising. If you have a connection to the Abosom, ritual dance, ritual song, libation, ritual prayer, what could be called yoga and so forth, those are ritual practices then. But if you have no connection to the Abosom, any imitation of any of those practices is meaningless. They have no connection to Sekhmet, so to them, menstruation is just a burden. They want to do whatever they can to stop it. We're different. We're original. We're real people. We're the only authentic human beings on Earth. So the females have a direct connection to Asase Afuya, Asasia, the Earth Mothers, and they have a connection to Sekhmet, and they need to strengthen that connection from the time they become, they enter into young womanhood through the phase where the Trois Bras, or the end of the menstrual phase of life starts, and then they become elders and elderesses, and then they start dealing with these different Nsamafo that they have birthed into the world for the benefit of the larger society. So, yeah, you can do a lot of things physiologically and dietarily to stop the menstrual cycle, and that's why they promote it in these so-called New Age journals, pseudo-metaphysical journals, websites. They're trying to convince black women to stop doing something or stop the process where they connect to one of our great mothers, so they won't be hearing our great mothers. They're repelling the great mother so that they can listen to white people. They're repelling a force in nature, a divine entity, and so that they won't tune into her so they can listen to some filthy white cracker. That's foolishness. So we got to get beyond that. And so you asked about whether it's not as weakening. There's a difference between somebody having a menstrual flow that's excessive because they're eating, fried chicken every day and all kinds of foolishness. Now they shouldn't be having an excessive flow. Just like when it's hot outside, it's natural for you to sweat and excrete, fluid. Now if you're just sweating too much, then there's a problem. But sweating is normal. Excreting water is normal. It's the same thing with the menstrual cycle, with the Obra, with the Sechima. A release of the blood is normal because the ovum needs to be released. But excessive bleeding because of bad diet or a lack of proper sleep or proper exercise regimen and things like that, yes, then that's a problem. But the cycle in and of itself, that's a sacred cycle. So that's not something that should be stopped. It needs to be embraced. Okay, and Sankofa Safo said, don't forget that some African women, especially healers, can stop and start the cycle. Yes, now that's also true. So some women at will, spiritually, they can stop their cycle and they can start their cycle. Sometimes people do it because, for traumatically, they can turn that cycle off. But then some people do it ritually, deliberately, because there are certain rituals that are necessary for somebody to not be on their cycle. But yes, so that is true. That's important. Okay, the brother asks, if we must practice divine hate, then how do we define the behavior whites have practiced against us? Okay, and that's also a good question. Just like we talked about, there's a difference between love, which for us is law, and then lust. Law attracts your balance, naturally attracts your balance to your life. Love attracts your natural complement to your life. Law is an instrument through which you attract your balance to your life. Your complement is your balance. So whether it's in love, whether it's in law, you're attracting balance to your life through law, through love. And that's an expansive attraction. Lust is when you have a misguided attraction, a perversion of love, a perversion of law. So you have a misguided, perverse attraction that's abnormal. When we talked about like a rapist, somebody engaged in child molestation, and so forth, that's that's a perverse attraction. It's the same thing with hate, with rejection. There's a difference between hate. Hate is the divine rejection of disorder for the purpose of maintaining the integrity of the divine order, like your immune system. Your immune system is constantly rejecting disorder in order to maintain your body's order. The perversion of hate is, in English, is called malice. In Twi, it's called Adweni Bani, which Adweni means mind and Bani means evil, so it means an evil intent. Malice is an evil intent to corrupt and destroy. You're not destroying something because it's creating disorder. You're destroying something because you want to create disorder. So the Achiwadifo operate in lust and malice. Afurakanu, Afurakaitnu operate in law, love, and hate. We accept that which is in harmony with divine order, to live in harmony with divine order, and then we reject, hate that which creates disorder. So we hate disorder and its purveyors. We reject disorder, we reject the purveyors of disorder so that we can maintain divine order. The Achiwadifo engage in lust and malice. They have a perverse desire or attraction towards disorder, and they engage in activities that promote disorder, which is malicious. So if you look at enslavement, for example, if you have hate, if you have rejection of disorder, then you can't enslave anybody because it's disorder. If we, Afurakanu, Afurakaitnu, if you have hate, divine hate, you couldn't enslave the Achiwadifo because that means they would have to live with you. You wouldn't go thousands of miles away from your home, grab some spirits of disorder that you hate, and force them to live with you for the rest of their lives. And if they try to escape, then you go after them and drag them back so they can stay with you forever until they die. If you're doing that, then you have some perverse desire, some perverse attraction to maintain disorder. You have a perverse attraction to the entities. For us, we don't want to be anywhere near the Achiwadifo. We don't only want to exterminate them and get as far away from them as possible. We wouldn't want to bring them to us and make them stay with us. So they weren't engaged in hate, rejection of disorder. They were engaged, on one hand, in malice, And also in lust, they had a perverse attraction to maintain disorder. They were perversely attracted to us. They weren't repelling us. Hate is about rejection. It's about repulsion. It's about abomination. It's about loathing. It's about staying as far away from the hated target as possible. It's about aversion. If they continuously come after you, then they have a perverse lust, and they just need to be exterminated. They need to be cut down. But we, divine law wouldn't allow us to do that because we want to have nothing to do with that. And that aspect is also covered in Maranechi parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so, and while we're at that, we're dealing with, there's a lot of information that's come out recently. So let's just deal with it quickly. We're talking about rejection of disorder, right? Talking about repulsion. Sekhmet is about that. Abenaa is about that. So you have a lot of these Negroes, Christians, Muslims, different groups dealing with the child molestation. So for example, the Nubians, Dr. York, he pleaded guilty. It's not about, being set up. This Negro pleaded guilty to over 100 counts of child molestation. Now, of course, his followers, and then you have others, are defending him. They'll say he was set up and things like that. There is not one Nubian or one strident supporter of Dr. York who is not absolutely clear that he did everything, including more than that they accuse him of and that he pled guilty to. All of the Nubians know that he is a homosexual, rapist, pedophile. All of them know that. So whenever you hear them on YouTube, or you see them online, or you see them, writing articles talking about the case and trying to get, free Dr. York and all this other foolishness, understand that every one of them knows that he did the crime. They know he perpetrated it. So now you have to look beyond what people are saying, and you have to look at their intent, because we're talking about law and love, hate, talking about lust and malice. There are three kinds of people who typically defend sex offenders. And when you've worked with, survivors of sexual crimes, as I have for a number of years, you understand that there are different groups of people who defend these people. Number one, the victims. Many of those people in that organization have been victimized either by him, or they've been victimized by other people in the organization, or they've been victimized by somebody in their family or somewhere in their life. They've been victimized. And when victims, often what they end up doing is they defend the perpetrators. Often, especially children, but then sometimes even with adults, because he wasn't just accused of dealing with children. He's a homosexual, rapist, pedophile, but there were also older people as well. So victims often end up defending the perpetrator. They fear the perpetrator, and they still have fear. So what they do as a defense mechanism is to try to protect the perpetrator. On one hand, it makes them feel a sense of self-worth, so they're protecting themselves, making themselves pretend like they had control, but they're actually protecting the person, so that shows that they're actually in control of the situation. There's a lot of perverse psychology, discord, and spirituality going along with people who've been through that kind of trauma. On the other hand, they're also trying to defend the perpetrator, because deep down inside they still fear the perpetrator, and they feel like if they don't defend the perpetrator, then eventually they'll get victimized all over again. So they're still going through this spiritually discordant trauma. So you'll find children who have been victimized they'll defend the perpetrator very often. Not all of them, but some of them will. Some of them will, reject the perpetrator and want to kill the perpetrator. But you have some who are so controlled by the perpetrator that they will defend him or her. Then you have people, so that's one class of the people who are defenders of York. Then you have the people who are perpetrators themselves, people who are in the organization who are child molesters, who are homosexuals, faggots, dykes, lesbians, people who are still engaged in molesting children, people who are still engaged in sexual deviance. Of course, they are supporters of Dr. York because they're part of his class, they're part of his group. And then you have a third class of people who are his strident supporters, who are potential perpetrators. They're involved in the organization, or they're attracted to the organization because they have those inclinations to be perpetrators, but they've never engaged in an act because they fear consequences. You have a number of people, if it was legal, they would do it, but they're too scared to engage in it. But they like to be in the midst of it because they can fantasize about it and they can just be around it. They're filthy in the mind, they're just too scared to move forward. So it's like with any other crime, there's some people, they'll commit a crime, they don't care what the consequences are, they'll take the chance. There are other people who, they would love to steal somebody's car, they would love to steal some money from somebody, they fantasize about it all the time, but they're just too scared to make that move because they're more scared of going to jail than they are of engaging in the crime. So if they can be around that kind of activity all 24/7, then they'll engage in it. They're the kind of people who buy porno tapes and all kinds of stuff like that. They can't do what they really want to do, but if they can surround themselves with it, they can fantasize about it, and they're potential predators, and then maybe one day they'll be able to actually engage in the act and not get caught. So you have people who are victims, people who are perpetrators, and then you have people who are potential perpetrators who haven't engaged in the acts yet, but they would, if they had a chance, they would. These are the people who are Nubians who are in the organization, and some who are outside of the organization. Now, we're not talking about just the average person who, one day picked up a book or liked some of the information because they hadn't ever gotten any real information, and they're reading stuff about this fool talking about he comes from another galaxy and all this other foolishness, and this pseudo-metaphysics and this just pure stupidity of the documentation and the pure stupidity of the pseudo-research that he engages in, and all this information he grabs from white channel material and new age books and all this other foolishness. They don't know anything about that. So they picked up a few books, or somebody introduced them to a few books that sounded different from Christianity. He weaves in information from other people's documentation. He weaves in true things, and then he sticks the foolishness in, talking about he comes from another galaxy. So some people just read the information and was like, wow, this is different from the church, and they got a little excited about it. We're not talking about those kinds of people. The people who are in the organization, who are strident supporters of the organization, all of them. There's not one of them who doesn't understand clearly that he is guilty of every one of those crimes, plus all the crimes he was guilty of in the same sexual deviant category when they were in Brooklyn. These people are victims, some of them. Other ones are perpetrators and potential perpetrators, and they support him. So you need to understand you're dealing with spiritually discordant, psychologically insane individuals who are supporters of a quote-unquote intergalactic homosexual rapist pedophile. That's all he is. So when you deal with these individuals and you will come in contact with them online, just understand they're not interested in telling the truth because they already know the truth. Every one of them knows it's true. So when you have defenders of homosexuals, defenders of rapists, defenders of child molesters, understand they are either a faggot themselves, a victim, or a perpetrator, or a potential perpetrator. In no matter what category that they find themselves in, all of them are spiritually discordant. And it's no different he's just a representative in that group. But then, of course, look at where he comes from. He comes from, that whole doctrine is rooted in, the Islam, the other foolish doctrines. The Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad was laying up with little teenage girls, a serial pedophile, not ancient, but Islam going back to the fictional prophet Muhammad, a pedophile. So, that's part of the culture. It's all part of white culture. The rabbis, pedophiles, that's part of their culture. Christianity, full of pedophilia all throughout the Catholic Church, up until the day, of course, the scandals all across the church. That's part of white culture. So if you're engaged in Christianity, engaged in some form of Judaism, Hebrewism, engaged in some form of Islam, of course that's going to come out because that's part of white culture. So it'll show up like in the Catholic Church first, but then when you look at the black churches, the black Catholic churches, it's the same filth. It'll show up in Islam amongst the whites, but then people who are claiming Islam and claiming these different white pseudo versions of Islam, because all of them are pseudo, it's going to show up there. In the Christian Protestant churches, you'll find the same thing. Eddie Long is a faggot. He was, molesting these young boys. And what happens when he gets caught and he gives a settlement, probably paid millions of dollars? The congregation comes back and they cheer for him. They give him a coronation, give him standing ovations, because these people are victims. Some of them are perpetrators, some of them are potential perpetrators. So they stay in the church and they support the homosexual, rapist, pedophile. And then when some of them were intelligent enough to say, wait a minute, this is a faggot, let's leave. But then of course they were brainwashed, so they go to another church. They go down to Creflo Dollar's church, and he turns around and admonishes them and berates them for leaving Eddie Long's church, and admonishes them and says, you need to go back and you should support your pastor. This is another faggot running another church. They're all in the same group. They're all the same people. When you embrace that foolishness, when you embrace that kind of foolishness stridently, you'll come up with all kinds of rationalizations why you should continue to support the homosexual, rapist, pedophile, but that's white culture. So when you come in contact with that kind of stuff, and we were just talking about divine law and divine hate, the acceptance of order and the rejection of disorder, we can't, of course, naturally accept any of that kind of foolishness. That's not part of our culture. That's white culture. Sekhmet doesn't accept homosexuality. Bisexuality, of course, not sexual deviance and child molestation and incest and all these different things. And the same thing with any Abosom, any of the Nsamanfo, any of that. So that's just part of, Oh, and somebody also mentioned, the whole thing about aliens, extraterrestrials. That's all foolishness coming from white people. And then the only time you hear black people talking about that is when the black people have been studying white people. The Abosom are not extraterrestrials. The Abosom are not aliens. The Abosom didn't come from other star systems. We didn't come from other star systems. The only time you hear black people talking that foolishness is when they came in contact with white people. And white people lying about what Afuraikai on the continent said, like the Dogon and so forth. The Dogon never said that they came from another star system and all this other foolishness. So the only connection to stars is no different than the Abosom operating through the sun, the Abosom operating through the earth. That's not an extraterrestrial. That's that's just foolishness. So. All right. Okay, so we're going to stop here. If you have any other questions, hit us up on the email. I'll send you the address right now. You can hit us up on NANASOM at Odwirafo.com. And we also have a network afuraka.ning.com. And you can connect on the network, and if you have questions about certain things, you can also download the documents that we have. We have documents going into detail about all of the information we've discussed. Now we will be putting out some more separate videos. We will have a series on divine law and divine hate, but we wanted to talk about that in the beginning so we can get greater insight into who Abenaa is as the female aspect of the divine hate of the Supreme Being. And next week we're going to talk about Benaa, Eru Behudet, as the male aspect of the divine hate of the Supreme Being. So, Medase for coming out and checking out the broadcast, and we will see you in the next section. Medase.